Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about reincarnation. So there's an old video from ABC Primetime about a kid who apparently reincarnated. I figure this is good content for right now, seeing as we're all going to die or whatever. So here it is. Basically, you know, you're going to find out. I don't think this is real, but we're going to get into it.
Once again, Charles Gibson.
And now, one of the biggest questions of life. What happens when it's over? Heaven? Hell? Nothing? Or might there be a fourth possibility, reincarnation? Could we come back as someone else? Here's Chris Cuomo with two down-to-earth parents who thought they understood the mysteries of life. That is, until their toddler began to talk.
On March 3rd, 1945, a 21-year-old Navy fighter pilot on a mission over the Pacific was shot down by Japanese artillery. His name might well have been forgotten, were it not for the remarkable, some might say unbelievable story of a little boy named James.
Well, we'll see about that.
Okay, this is really tough. I need somebody to help me.
All right, I'm the volunteer. What do you want me to do?
Okay, I'll just go climb this thing and you have to...
Alright, so this is James. He was apparently reincarnated. In the video you're seeing right now, he's like 6 years old. And they're going to tell a bunch of stories from when he was 3 years old. And just keep that in mind. Just remember how he's talking right now. He's talking like a 6-year-old. But you'll find out when he was 3, he apparently was on point with everything.
Call me in case I fall.
Done.
James Leiniger is all boy, 6 years old and full of spirit.
This is a special plane. It goes in reverse. You don't see a lot of that.
James knows a lot about planes, especially war planes.
What kind of airplane is that?
It's a Corsair.
His parents, Andrea and Bruce Leiniger, say from an early age, James would play with nothing else.
He was obsessed with airplanes. If you look around the house, that's all you...
Okay, for one, we're to believe that you look around the house and that's all there was. We didn't buy them. I mean, James, he would just come home. He would leave. He was 3. He would leave. He would buy these planes. And I point this out because you're going to find out in a second how ridiculous the whole thing is.
But then, when he was 2, the planes James loved suddenly began to give him frequent and frightening nightmares.
So we're talking about when he was 1 at this point. He was 1 and the house was filled with planes, and that was because of James's choice. James chose to fill the house with planes before he could speak, no less.
I'd wake him up and he'd be screaming, and he'd always be laying on his back, kicking his feet up at the ceiling. And I'd say, "Baby, what were you dreaming about?" And he'd say, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out."
Oh, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. It's weird because he's 6 now, and he still can't form sentences like that. But okay, Mom.
They sound like typical kiddie nightmares, but Andrea says they went on the same way for months. Maybe too much TV. But James was just 2, and his parents say only watching Barney and Teletubbies.
So how did he even know what a plane was if he's only watching Barney and Teletubbies? Because when he was 1, the house was filled with planes.
Tubbies!
And Andrea and Bruce say they weren't watching World War II documentaries or conversing about military history.
This is an F-18?
No, that one.
So what explains the nightmares and James's strange obsession with airplanes?
I talked to my mom about it a lot of times. My mom had said maybe he's remembering a past life.
What did you say?
Politely, baloney.
Hey, can you believe that? The nerve of this man. His wife is talking to his mother-in-law about, you know, the possible reincarnation of their son, and all he has on his mind is sandwiches? Come on, man. And bologna at that? You know, at least go for turkey.
What did you say?
Politely, baloney.
Politely bologna with a scotch.
Highly educated
Couple. To them, the possibility that their little son James was manifesting signs of a former life was, well, a little out there.
You know, having a past life is not the initial conclusion that you come to. You try and figure out any other way he could have. Did he see anything? Has there ever been anything on television, anything that we've discussed?
But as time went by, Andrea didn't know what to
There was the planes that you filled the house with when he was 1.
What to believe. Here's James at age 3, going over a plane as if he's doing a pre-flight check. He would continue to say...
I guess James bought that flight suit himself and everything, because they weren't putting this stuff in his head. You have to realize that. They weren't putting this in his head. It was just James.
Things that were puzzling, like the time his mom bought him a toy airplane.
And I said, oh, look, there's a bomb on the bottom of it. He said, that's not a bomb, Mama, that's a drop tank.
A drop tank?
I'd never heard of a drop tank. I didn't know what a drop tank was.
Andrea's mother suggested she look into the work of counselor and therapist Carol Bowman. Bowman has written 2 books, both supporting the proposition that sometimes the dead can be reborn.
So this is where we all know what happened here. I don't know how this family got connected with this woman, obviously. Did she just show up at the door like the Men in Black or something? She contacted the only child counselor that believes in reincarnation is the reason why kids talk the way they do. I would say that the reason this whole thing exists is because this couple and this woman got together and they realized it would be great promotion for the book if you had somebody who was really reincarnated. And obviously there's going to be nothing in this that makes you think, like James at no point is like, yeah, he never says any of these memories. It's all from the parents. When James was 3, he used to, you wouldn't believe, he was just all full of memories.
We are taught from a very early age in this culture, in the Judeo-Christian culture, that reincarnation doesn't exist. Once you observe this in a child, and the evidence is very compelling,
and you write books about it, and you want to sell those books, you find a couple, you convince them to help sell the books.
you have to open up to another explanation for what is going on.
Bruce was deeply skeptical.
He said there has to be a logical explanation.
I don't believe in past lives. I don't believe in this stuff.
I don't believe in past lives. I don't believe in this stuff. But I do believe in cold, hard cash. Good one, Brady.
But with the violent nightmares recurring 3 and 4 times a week, the Leinegers felt they had to do something. So with guidance from Bowman, they cautiously began to encourage James to share his memories. They say the result was startling.
The nightmares immediately started reducing in frequency. He went down from 3 or 4 times a week to maybe 1 a week, 1 every other week. And at that point was when he started to articulate more about these past life memories.
Seems normal enough, a little boy improving when his troubles are directly addressed.
He's only watched Barney. Where did the simulator come from?
This is the age when former lives are most easily recalled.
They haven't had the cultural conditioning, the layering over of experience in this life, so that the memories can percolate up more easily. These memories tend to fade between the ages of 5 to 7.
His parents say between the ages of 2 and 4, James would reveal extraordinary details about the life of a former fighter pilot. Mostly at bedtime.
Remember how James talks now. Wait till you hear. I would be more concerned, less about the reincarnation, and more about how he's, regressing. How he could speak really well at the age of 2, but by 6, he could barely talk to the reporter at the start. He could barely get a sentence together.
When he was drowsy.
Bruce said, what happened to your plane? He said, it crashed on fire. And Bruce said, why did your airplane crash? And he said, it got shot. And Bruce said, well, who shot your plane? And I'll never forget the look on his face. He went, oh, the Japanese.
What? Bruce would never say anything around him about this sort of thing. I mean, other than when he would get drunk and scream about the Japanese. But other than that, we rarely talked about this sort of thing.
Still, despite these extraordinary stories, Bruce remained dubious, almost to prove they couldn't be true. He began to piece together the details James was sharing. And what he found, he says, shook him to the core. For in many instances, the stories appeared to match the facts. James seemed to be recalling real events, real people, in the life of a man who'd been dead for almost 60 years.
Coming up, a toddler, just 3 years old. So how does he know the pilots from a World War II squadron?
Because his parents told him.
It was like, holy mackerel. You could have poured my brains out of my ears. I just couldn't believe it.
When Prime Time continues.
You could have poured my brain out of my ears. When he was a baby, I did a lot of acid. Okay, a lot. I realized it was my last chance to do this sort of thing, so I did a lot of acid, and I would yell about the Japanese. But I don't understand what's going on with this kid. He was obviously reincarnated to help sell a book. I mean, just because.
With each passing month, little James Leiniger seemed to be peeling back memories of a past life.
Not that he was...
Vivid memories that scared and astonished his parents.
Bruce had always said, what kind of plane did you fly? And he said, a Corsair.
Yeah.
He said a Corsair?
He said the word Corsair. Yeah.
Not only did James remember flying a Corsair, he demonstrated knowledge of the plane's peculiar...
Let's just a little side note, when he's pointing out what plane that he was flying, the kid was shitting his pants. So the parents, I mean, come on guys, what kind of plane did you use to, James? Corsair.
At the time he was flipping through a book about planes when he was 4.
And he got to the Corsair and he said, that's a Corsair. And he goes, you know what? They used to get flat tires all the time.
In fact, historians and pilots agree that the plane...
They used to get flat tires all the time. And I'm a 4-year-old that talks like he's 15. But when I turn 6, I'll barely be able to talk at all. So, okay.
Tires took a lot of punishment on landing. Of course, this is a fact that could easily be found in books or on TV. But then, James began to offer up the kinds of specific details his parents say are harder to explain away.
Another night, Bruce had come in and he said, do you remember where your plane took off? And he said it took off of a boat. Do you remember the name of your boat? Natoma. Do you remember what your name was? And he'd always say, James. But his name is James. It never really occurred to us. We thought he just wasn't understanding the question.
I believe that he knew his name was James. I'll give him that.
So I said, do you remember any friends or anyone else that you flew with? And he said, Jack Larson.
Jack Larson.
Bruce began doing some...
Old Larcy. Me and Larcy used to kick back the beers, get in fights at the port, is what James said. That's what James said.
Some research. Almost immediately, he discovered that the Natoma was an actual ship, a small aircraft carrier in the Pacific called the Natoma Bay.
What?
And Jack Larson, the Navy buddy little James recalled? Well, it turns out there was a pilot named Jack Larson who served aboard the Natoma Bay. In fact, he's alive and well and living in Arkansas.
And it was like, holy mackerel. I mean, really, you could have poured my brains out of my ears.
Acid.
And I just couldn't believe it.
And there were more clues. Around this time, James began signing crayon drawings and other artwork, James 3.
One day I asked him why he's calling himself James 3. Well, it's because I'm the 3rd James. And every once in a while you ask him that today, and he'll still say the same thing.
And one day, while leafing through a...
Because we've drilled it in his head. In fact, we wouldn't give him treats unless he would repeat this information.
Battle of Iwo Jima.
Bruce turned to an aerial photo of the Pacific Island. James was seated nearby.
He pointed to it and he goes, Daddy, that's where my airplane was shot down. And I said, what? That's my airplane got shot down there, Daddy. And I just went blank. I couldn't say anything.
I don't even think an adult pilot would be able to, at a side glance, see an island that somebody else is reading in a book. Keep in mind he's got the eyes of a 4-year-old, and he can somehow side up. That's the island. That's it. That's the island that I was shot down at, Dad. That's where it happened. I can see it. And sure enough, the World War II books that I was reading, that I did, and he was into Barney. And I didn't have anything to do with this.
Then Bruce had become a man possessed, searching the internet, combing through military records, and interviewing men who served aboard the Natoma Bay. Finally, a breakthrough. He learned that there was just one pilot from the squadron killed at Iwo Jima. That pilot, James M. Houston Jr. Is this why little James was calling himself James III?
It just crystallized in my mind. This has to be who we're talking about. Yeah.
Imagine you're like a schoolyard, you're on the schoolyard with James, and you're like, hey James, like, you want to trade your Joe Louis? And he's just looking over at you like, I traded my health for your freedom, Bryce. Are you kidding me right now? You owe me that, Joe Louis. You owe me a lot more than that. You know, James, what's your favorite color? The blood of my enemies is my favorite color. Ma'am? Are you kidding? James is just smoking a cigar. Are you kidding me? I'm James III. I fought in the war. My parents didn't have anything to do with it.
You know, my meter of skepticism was starting to go over toward belief.
That's the money. With the money.
Shot down. Told of how his plane had sustained a direct hit on the
I got an airplane, and I said, well, can you show me where it was? And he pointed right up to the front of the engine.
That's what makes this man's story so intriguing. His name is Ralph Clarber. Clarber was a rear gunner on a TBM Avenger that flew off the Natoma Bay. On March 3rd, 1945...
These poor old people have to appease these parents, you know? Yeah, I guess your son may have done it. I mean, I wrote a book. It sounds a lot like you read the book that I wrote. And your son doesn't seem to know anything. And I think he might have shit his pants, actually. But yeah, okay.
He took part in a raid near Iwo Jima. As it happens, Clarber's plane was right next to the one flown by James M. Houston, Jr. It was to be Hugh's last mission before leaving for home the following day. As Clarber recalls, the sky was thick with enemy flak.
We experienced pretty heavy anti-aircraft fire, but this was the most intense that I experienced at any time.
Suddenly, a flash near the nose of Houston's plane.
I saw the hit. I would say he was hit head-on, yeah, right on the middle of the engine.
Just as little James had described it.
So what do you believe now about your son James?
I believe that he had a past life. I believe that in his past life he was James M. Houston, Jr. And he came back because he wasn't finished with something.
And that something was promoting a book.
And that's essentially what I believe.
Dear Bruce and Andrea.
And he's not the only one. This past October, the Leinegers received a letter from a woman named Ann Barron, the sister of pilot James Houston. Andrea and Bruce had contacted her about their little boy.
Old senile Ann.
Barron heard about what young James was saying, and she believes.
All of this is still overwhelming. I can only imagine how it has affected you, but I believe, with my love to you, Ann. The child was so convincing and coming up with all these things that there's no way in the world he could know, unless there is a spiritual thing.
I think that the parents are self-deceived, that they're fascinated by the mysterious, and they've built up a fairy tale.
You older me, way older me. I don't believe this at all. I'm a old man now.
Professor Paul Kurtz of the University of Buffalo heads an organization that investigates claims of the paranormal.
He's overhearing conversations of his parents. He's looking at cues. He may talk to his little friends or hear from neighbors. And then this conviction that builds up that, yes, he was this pilot, and yes, he will come to believe.
You think that this man doesn't know what's going on? He could hear James' lies from miles away. Check out the ears on this man. He could hear a lie, and an elephant never forgets. So just keep that in mind when you look at this man and these wings. He flew in World War II, no plane, no airplane, this man.
Believe that himself.
Do you ever rack your brain and say, gee, I hope I didn't say anything or do anything that put this in James' head? Do you ever question yourself still or no?
No, because we're talking to a 2-year-old. You know, I mean, what am I going to do? Sit him in a corner and say, listen, we're going to concoct.
I got shot down by a plane. The Japanese shot me down. Me and my buddy Jack Larson. I mean, you're talking to a 2-year-old. A 2-year-old that speaks in perfect full sentences and answers questions about World War II. This is all true.
It's this elaborate scheme. And you're going to imagine that you went through those things.
I knew what he watched on television. I knew what stories I read to him.
I know that we were helping to promote a book.
Protective first time Southern mother. There was no other place he could have been getting this information.
Assuming the liners are acting in good faith, what we have here is a classic conflict of faith versus science. Hard facts against beliefs that often can't be easily explained. There's no doubt where Paul Kurtz stands.
People have a right to believe, surely in America, there's freedom of conscience. On the other hand, do you want to believe in something that is false?
So how do you rationalize a belief in anything bigger than ourselves if you have to fall back on science all the time?
Not simply science, on the facts, on common sense.
Once upon a time, the Reincarnation might have agreed, but that was before the amazing stories told by their young son forced them to consider the possibilities and to examine their faith.
Whether you believe in reincarnation or not, it's about the eternal life of the human spirit.
That's right.
And that's something God promises to us. There is something else out there after this. It's not over when you die.
The part of me really doesn't want to bash these guys, because reincarnation's got to be one of the better ideas of after death. You know, it starts, the worst one is like you just die and you become food for bugs. And you're like, oh, that sucks. And then, you know, there's the sort of like go to a cool place where all your old family and friends are. And then there's reincarnation is like one that's like, you know, I don't believe in a man in the sky, but I definitely think I could get to come back and be another little boy. I want to be another little boy again. It's almost like you just, bang, you get another try. It sounds so great. I want it to be true. I wish it was true. I just, in the process of being reincarnated, I hope God shows me this video and is like, you're an ass. You were being an ass to James III and his parents and the lady who wrote the books.
Two gifts
sent to him by pilot James Houston's sister. A bust of George Washington and a model of a Corsair aircraft. They were among the personal effects of James Houston, sent home after the war.
Do you feel differently about James? Has this changed your relationship with him?
No. We have always felt that he's a special little boy because he's our son. He appears to have experienced something that I don't think is unique, but the way it's been revealed is quite astounding. It doesn't change how we think. I don't look at him and say, that's not my son, that's someone else. That's my boy. Good one!
You made it all up, so it's pretty easy to do that. I don't look at him as any different than the kid that I tell people said all this stuff that he didn't say. And I love him.
It might be a natural assumption that it's just Buddhists and Hindus who believe in reincarnation. But would it surprise you to know that 1 out of every 4 Americans, Christians and Jewish alike, believe that souls do return again in different bodies? We'll be right back.
I wish it was true, you know? Wouldn't that be so great to just get to come back? And it sounds believable. It sounds like it could definitely happen. So I hope this is real. I hope I get to come back. I should have to come back as I don't know, something not good for making this video, for making the video. But yeah, reincarnation, debunked.